Atlas had never refused his dinner. Not once. But after meeting a stranger outside a grocery store, the German Shepherd pushed his bowl away and looked toward the door as if someone was waiting for him. Caleb Rowe noticed the change immediately. Atlas was not the kind of dog who ignored food. The loyal German Shepherd had always been calm, dependable, and ready for their daily routine. Every morning, Caleb took him on long walks through the neighborhood. Every evening, Atlas rested by his side. Their bond was built on trust, a quiet friendship between a man and a dog who understood each other without needing many words. But that night was different. Atlas sat beside his untouched meal, his eyes fixed on the front window. Caleb watched carefully. Something had happened that he did not understand. Earlier that afternoon, Caleb and Atlas had stopped outside a local grocery store. It was a place they visited often. People came and went carrying bags, talking with friends, and continuing with their busy lives. Near the entrance, Caleb noticed an older veteran sitting quietly with a small backpack beside him. The man did not ask for attention. He simply sat there, watching the world move around him. Caleb offered a kind greeting before walking inside. Atlas had stopped for a moment. The German Shepherd looked at the veteran with unusual focus. Not fear, not curiosity, something deeper. Caleb remembered the moment because Atlas rarely reacted that way to strangers. The dog had stood still, almost as if recognizing something important. After leaving the store, Caleb thought the moment would be forgotten. But Atlas did not forget. Hours later, when Caleb placed his food bowl down, Atlas barely looked at it. Instead, he walked to the door and waited. Caleb looked at him with confusion. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly. Atlas only looked back toward the street. That was when Caleb realized this was not about food. This was about someone they had met. The next morning, Caleb decided to return to the grocery store. He wanted to understand what Atlas had noticed. As they walked down the sidewalk, Atlas moved with purpose. The German Shepherd was not distracted by passing cars or familiar sounds. His attention stayed on the path ahead. When they reached the store, Caleb saw the same veteran sitting nearby. The moment Atlas noticed him, everything became clear. The dog slowly walked forward and sat beside the man. The veteran looked surprised. Then his expression softened. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. They simply shared a quiet moment that seemed to carry a story Caleb did not yet know. Caleb stood nearby, watching. He had no idea why Atlas had chosen this person. He did not know what connection existed between a loyal dog and a stranger outside a grocery store. But he knew one thing. Atlas had never been wrong about the people who mattered. And now, Caleb was about to discover why this one stranger meant so much to him. The next morning, Caleb Rowe returned to the grocery store with Atlas walking quietly beside him. The question from the night before was still on his mind. Why had a simple meeting changed the way his dog behaved? Atlas had always been loyal, but this was different. It was as if the German Shepherd was carrying a message that only he understood. As they approached the entrance, Caleb saw the older veteran sitting in the same area. The man looked peaceful, but there was a quiet loneliness around him. People walked past with their shopping bags, busy with their own lives. Some offered a polite smile. Others did not notice him at all. But Atlas noticed. The moment the German Shepherd saw the veteran, his pace slowed. He walked forward gently and sat beside him. The veteran looked down with surprise. Then he smiled softly and placed a hand near Atlas. There was no excitement or loud reaction, just a quiet connection between two souls who seemed to understand something without words. Caleb introduced himself and started a conversation. He learned that the man was a retired veteran who had spent many years serving his country. Now, life was much quieter. He did not talk about his struggles. He did not ask for sympathy. He simply appreciated small moments and peaceful conversations. Caleb respected that. He noticed something important about the man. The veteran did not seem to want people to feel sorry for him. He wanted to be seen as a person, not as a story people passed by. Over the next few days, Caleb and Atlas continued visiting the grocery store. Each time, Atlas looked for the veteran. Each time, the man seemed a little more comfortable around them. Caleb brought a warm drink one afternoon and sat nearby while Atlas rested beside the veteran. They talked about simple things. The weather, the neighborhood, memories from years ago. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced. Just two people sharing a quiet moment. Caleb began noticing small details. The veteran carefully kept a worn photograph inside his wallet. He would sometimes look at it before putting it away again. He also carried a small item that looked like it had been kept for many years. Caleb did not ask about it. He understood that some stories needed time before they could be shared. Atlas seemed to understand that too. The German shepherd never rushed the man. He never demanded attention. He simply stayed close. One evening, Caleb watched Atlas refuse to leave until the veteran finished his conversation. It reminded him of the night before when Atlas refused his meal. The dog had not been acting strangely. He had been trying to tell Caleb something. There was someone who needed to be remembered. Someone who had spent too much time being invisible. As the sun began to set, Caleb walked home with Atlas beside him. He looked down at the loyal German shepherd and smiled. He still did not know the full story behind their connection. But he knew Atlas had discovered something that many people had missed. Behind every quiet face, there was a story waiting to be heard. And Caleb was beginning to understand that sometimes a small act of kindness can reveal a much bigger miracle. Days passed, but Atlas continued returning to the same place. Every afternoon, when the sun moved lower across the sky, Caleb Rowe and the German shepherd walked toward the grocery store where the retired veteran waited quietly. What started as a strange moment had slowly become a familiar routine. Yet Caleb still felt there was a story hidden behind the connection between them. The veteran never asked for anything. He never complained about his situation. He simply sat near the entrance, watching people come and go with a calm expression. But Caleb noticed something whenever Atlas approached him. The man looked different. The quiet distance in his eyes seemed to disappear for a few moments. One afternoon, Caleb sat beside him while Atlas rested nearby. The veteran looked down at the German shepherd and smiled. "He reminds me of someone," he said softly. Caleb listened carefully. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph. The edges were worn from years of being carried, but the image was still clear. It showed the veteran when he was younger, standing beside a K9 companion. Caleb immediately understood why Atlas had been drawn to him. There was a familiar feeling between them. The veteran explained that his K9 partner had been more than a working companion. The dog had been a friend who stayed beside him through difficult days and quiet nights. When that chapter of his life ended, he carried the memories with him. But over time, fewer people asked about those memories. Fewer people wanted to hear the stories. Caleb looked at the photograph and then at Atlas. The German shepherd was sitting peacefully beside the veteran, almost as if he was listening too. "I think he knows," the veteran whispered. Caleb smiled gently. "Maybe he does." The afternoon breeze moved through the parking lot as people continued walking past them. But for the first time, Caleb noticed that some people slowed down. Some looked at the scene longer than before. A man who had once blended into the background was becoming visible again. Not because of sympathy, because someone had taken the time to listen. Over the following weeks, Caleb learned more about the veteran. He learned about his years of service, his love for animals, and the memories he still carried. But he also learned something else. The man was not waiting for someone to change his entire life. He was simply waiting for a reason to believe that connection was still possible. Atlas provided that reason. The German shepherd never tried to fix the past. He never erased old memories. He only offered his presence. Every visit, every afternoon, every quiet moment beside the person who needed it most. One evening, as Caleb prepared to leave, he noticed something unusual. The veteran reached down and gently touched Atlas's collar. His expression showed gratitude that words could not fully explain. Caleb realized then that Atlas had not just found a stranger outside a grocery store. He had found someone who understood loyalty the same way he did. Two hearts carrying memories. Two souls who knew what it meant to stay. And Caleb was beginning to understand that this was only the beginning of their story. The afternoon light rested softly over the grocery store parking lot as Caleb Rowe and Atlas arrived once again. What had started as a mystery was slowly becoming something much deeper. The German shepherd was no longer just stopping by a stranger. He was returning to someone who had become part of his world. Caleb watched from a short distance as Atlas approached the retired veteran with the same calm confidence he showed every day. The man smiled before the dog even reached him, as if he already knew that Atlas would come. There was comfort in that simple routine. No promises were made. No explanations were needed. They were just two souls meeting in the same place, sharing a quiet moment that meant more than anyone passing by could see. One afternoon, Caleb noticed a small change. The veteran brought the old photograph with him again. He held it carefully while looking at Atlas. I used to think those days were over, he said quietly. Caleb sat beside him and listened. The veteran explained that after leaving his years of service behind, life became much quieter. The people he once worked with moved on. The routines he once knew disappeared. But the memories of his K-9 companion remained. He remembered the patience, the trust, and the feeling of having someone beside him every day. That kind of connection stays with you, the veteran said. Caleb looked at Atlas resting near his feet. The German shepherd seemed peaceful, almost as if he understood every word. Later that afternoon, Caleb decided to learn more about the man behind the memories. He discovered that the veteran had always been someone who cared for others. Even now, despite his difficult circumstances, he still looked for ways to help people around him. He greeted workers at the store. He thanked strangers who offered a kind word. He never acted like someone waiting to be rescued. He simply carried a story that few people had taken the time to hear. Caleb realized something important. Sometimes people see a situation before they see the person. They see a moment in someone's life and assume they know the whole story. But the veteran was not defined by where he sat or what he had lost. He was defined by the years he spent caring, protecting, and showing loyalty. Atlas seemed to recognize that from the very beginning. That evening, Caleb brought a small meal and sat with the veteran outside the store. Atlas rested between them while the sky slowly changed colors. The three of them remained there quietly, surrounded by the sounds of everyday life. Cars passing, doors opening, people walking by. Yet within that small moment, something powerful was happening. A man who had become invisible was being seen again. A dog who followed instinct had created a bridge between two people. And Caleb understood that Atlas had not chosen the veteran because he was weak. The German shepherd had chosen him because he still carried a heart full of loyalty. As they walked home later, Caleb looked at Atlas and smiled. He finally understood why his companion had refused to eat that first night. Atlas was not asking for food. He was asking Caleb to notice someone who needed a friend. And sometimes, the smallest request from a faithful heart can lead to the greatest change. The days that followed brought a quiet change that few people noticed at first. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden transformation. It happened slowly, through small conversations and simple afternoons outside the grocery store. Caleb Rowe continued walking with Atlas to visit the retired veteran, but now something was different. The man who once sat alone was beginning to look forward to those moments. He would arrive a little earlier, carry the old photograph in his pocket, and smile when he saw the German shepherd approaching. Caleb noticed that Atlas had created a connection that went beyond friendship. The dog had reminded the veteran that his story still mattered. One afternoon, Caleb asked about the photograph again. The veteran looked down at the worn picture and smiled softly. He explained that his K-9 companion had been with him during one of the most meaningful chapters of his life. The dog was not just part of a routine. He was a reminder of trust, responsibility, and the feeling of never facing a difficult day alone. After that chapter ended, the veteran kept those memories close, but over time, fewer people asked about them. The stories remained inside him, waiting for someone willing to listen. Caleb understood that sometimes people do not lose their memories. They lose the people who want to hear them. Atlas seemed to change that. The German shepherd gave the veteran a reason to share again. Every visit became a small reminder that the past was not something to hide. It was something that shaped who he had become. As the weeks passed, Caleb started bringing small things that made their afternoons more comfortable. A warm drink, a simple meal, sometimes just a chair beside the veteran while they talked. Nothing expensive, nothing complicated, just kindness. The retired veteran always expressed gratitude, but Caleb noticed something deeper. The man was not simply thankful for what they brought. He was thankful that someone stayed long enough to know him. One afternoon, a few people leaving the grocery store noticed Atlas sitting beside the veteran. They stopped and asked about the dog. Caleb shared a little about how their friendship began. The veteran smiled as he listened. For the first time in a long while, people were not looking past him. They were looking at him. They saw the person behind the circumstances. They saw someone with memories, experiences, and kindness to offer. Atlas remained calm beside him, watching everything with peaceful eyes. Caleb realized that the German shepherd had never tried to change the world around him. He had only chosen one person and continued showing up. But sometimes, one small act of loyalty can create a path for many others to follow. That evening, as Caleb and Atlas walked home, the dog seemed completely content. The question that once surrounded Atlas was slowly becoming clear. He had refused his meal because something inside him knew that another soul needed attention first. The German shepherd had not abandoned his routine. He had discovered a new purpose. And Caleb was beginning to understand that true compassion does not always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it walks quietly beside you, waits patiently, and reminds you that no one should feel forgotten. The afternoon sky was calm as Caleb Rowe and Atlas walked toward the grocery store once again. The familiar path had become more than just a walk. It had become a reminder that small moments could carry great meaning. When they arrived, the retired veteran was already there, sitting quietly with the old photograph in his hand. But this time, something was different. He was not looking at the ground or waiting for the day to pass. He was watching the people around him with a peaceful expression. Atlas approached him and rested beside his chair. The German shepherd looked completely comfortable, as if this place had always been part of his world. Caleb smiled as he watched them together. He remembered the first night when Atlas refused his meal. At the time, he thought something was wrong. Now he understood. Atlas was never refusing food. He was trying to show Caleb someone who needed to be remembered. Over time, their visits became a quiet tradition. The retired veteran began sharing more stories, not because he felt pressured, but because he finally felt heard. He talked about his years of service, the people he met, and the canine companion who had once walked beside him. Each story carried a lesson about patience, loyalty, and trust. Caleb noticed that the veteran always spoke with respect when remembering those days. There was no bitterness in his voice, only gratitude. One afternoon, Caleb brought a small meal and placed it beside the veteran. Atlas watched carefully. The man smiled and looked at the dog. "You brought someone kind with you," he said softly. Caleb smiled. "I think he brought me here for a reason." The veteran looked toward Atlas and nodded. Some animals notice what people miss. Those words stayed with Caleb, because they were true. Many people had walked past this man every day. They saw a person sitting outside a store. But Atlas saw something different. He saw a person with memories. A person who still had kindness to give. A person who deserved a moment of connection. As the days continued, the veteran slowly became part of the small community around the grocery store. Employees greeted him by name. Neighbors stopped to talk. People who once walked by without noticing began taking a few minutes to listen. Caleb watched this change happen naturally. Nobody forced it. Nobody planned it. It began with a dog choosing to stay. One evening, as the sun lowered over the parking lot, Caleb sat beside Atlas and the veteran. The three of them watched the world move around them. Cars passed. People carried groceries home. The ordinary sounds of life continued. But in that small corner, something extraordinary had happened. A man who felt forgotten had found a reason to smile again. A dog had followed a feeling he could not explain. And Caleb had learned that compassion does not always arrive through a grand moment. Sometimes it arrives quietly, with four paws walking beside you. As they left, Atlas looked back one more time toward the veteran. The man smiled and waved gently. Caleb noticed that Atlas no longer looked like he was searching for someone. He looked like he had found him. The days became warmer, and the small routine outside the grocery store slowly turned into something the entire neighborhood began to recognize. Caleb Rowe noticed it before anyone else. The retired veteran was no longer sitting there simply watching the world move around him. He was becoming part of it again. Every afternoon, when Caleb and Atlas arrived, someone was usually nearby. A store employee would stop for a short conversation. A neighbor would ask about his memories. Someone would bring a simple drink and sit for a few minutes. None of it was planned. It all began with one German shepherd choosing to stay. Atlas remained the same. He never demanded attention. He never searched for praise. He simply walked beside Caleb, approached the veteran, and offered the quiet companionship that had changed everything. One afternoon, Caleb arrived earlier than usual and saw something that made him smile. The retired veteran was talking with a young family near the entrance of the store. He was sharing a story about his old canine companion, and the family listened with genuine interest. Months earlier, Caleb remembered, this same man had sat alone while hundreds of people passed by. Now, people stopped because they wanted to know him. The difference was not that his past had disappeared. The difference was that someone finally cared enough to ask about it. Later, as Caleb sat beside him, the veteran looked at Atlas and smiled. "He brought people back into my life," he said quietly. Caleb looked at the German shepherd resting near them. I think he just reminded people you were already here. The veteran looked down for a moment, holding the old photograph in his hand. He spoke about how easy it was for people to become invisible, not because they had nothing to offer, but because the world moved too quickly to notice. Caleb understood those words. He thought about all the times people had walked past without knowing the story behind that quiet figure outside the store. They saw a moment. Atlas saw a person. That evening, something unexpected happened. A store employee placed a small bowl of water near the entrance for Atlas during their visits. It was a simple gesture, but it showed how much things had changed. The place where Atlas first noticed a lonely man had become a place where kindness appeared naturally. Caleb watched the veteran smile at the small gesture. It was not about the water. It was about being remembered. As the sun lowered behind the buildings, Atlas rested beside the veteran while people continued walking around them. The German shepherd seemed peaceful, almost as if he knew his work was not about fixing everything. It was about opening a door that allowed one person to reconnect with others, a door that reminded a community to look closer. On the walk home, Caleb thought about the first night Atlas refused his meal. He finally understood the message hidden in that moment. Atlas had not turned away from something he needed. He had turned toward someone else who needed a friend. And sometimes, the greatest acts of compassion begin when we notice what everyone else has overlooked. The afternoon visits continued, but something about them had changed. The grocery store that once felt like a place where one person disappeared into the background had slowly become a place filled with familiar faces, quiet conversations, and unexpected friendships. Caleb Rowe noticed the transformation every time he walked beside Atlas. The German shepherd still followed the same path. He still stopped at the same entrance. He still greeted the retired veteran with the same calm loyalty. But now, the man was no longer sitting alone. One afternoon, Caleb arrived and saw the veteran laughing with a group of people nearby. It was a simple sound, but it carried a meaning Caleb understood. The man who once seemed distant was now sharing pieces of himself again. He was telling stories, listening to others, and allowing people to become part of his life. Atlas rested beside him, watching quietly as if he had known this moment would come. Later that day, the veteran showed Caleb something he had kept safely for many years. It was a small collection of memories from his time serving alongside his K-9 companion. There were photographs, old notes, and reminders of a bond that had shaped his life. Caleb looked through them carefully, realizing how much love and dedication existed behind those memories. I thought nobody wanted to hear these stories anymore, the veteran said softly. Caleb looked at him and smiled. Some stories are just waiting for the right person to listen. The veteran looked toward Atlas. Maybe he was that person first. Caleb understood what he meant. Atlas had not needed an explanation. The German shepherd had simply recognized something familiar in the veteran. A feeling of loyalty, a feeling of purpose, a feeling of knowing that someone beside you matters. As the weeks passed, the veteran became more comfortable being around others. He started spending more time outside. He greeted people walking by. He shared advice with younger neighbors. He even began helping small tasks around the area whenever he could. Caleb noticed that the biggest change was not in what the veteran did. It was in how he saw himself. He was no longer someone waiting to be noticed. He was someone who knew he still had something valuable to give. One evening, Caleb and Atlas sat with the veteran as the sun moved behind the buildings. The grocery store lights slowly turned on, and the familiar sounds of the neighborhood filled the air. The veteran looked at Atlas and gently smiled. "You know, I used to think some parts of life were finished forever," he said. "But maybe some things are only waiting for the right moment to begin again." Caleb looked at the German shepherd beside him. Atlas seemed completely peaceful, resting after another meaningful afternoon. He had never tried to change the world. He had never expected anything in return. He simply noticed someone who needed a friend and chose to stay. Caleb realized that was the true power of Atlas's actions. The dog did not erase the veteran's past. He did not remove every challenge. He gave something much more important. He gave a reason to believe that tomorrow could still hold something good. As they walked away that evening, Caleb glanced back toward the grocery store. The place where Atlas first stopped had become a symbol of something greater. A reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can create a path back to hope. And sometimes, the soul that needs saving is not waiting for someone to change everything. It is only waiting for someone to stay. The afternoon sun returned once again to the familiar streets near the grocery store. The same sidewalks, the same entrance, and the same quiet corner where a simple meeting had changed everything. Caleb Rowe walked beside Atlas, knowing that this place would always carry a special meaning. What began as a strange moment had become a reminder of how one small act of kindness could reach further than anyone expected. When they arrived, the retired veteran was already there. But he was no longer sitting alone. He was talking with neighbors, smiling at familiar faces, and sharing stories that had once remained hidden. Atlas walked toward him with the same calm confidence as always. The German Shepherd had never needed recognition. He never needed anyone to understand what he was doing. He simply returned because someone mattered. Caleb watched the two of them together and remembered the night when Atlas refused his meal. At first, he thought something was wrong. Now he understood the truth. Atlas had not rejected what was in front of him. He had noticed what everyone else had missed. He had seen a person who carried years of memories, kindness, and loyalty, but had become invisible to the world around him. The retired veteran looked at Caleb and smiled. "I still cannot believe a dog brought all of this back into my life," he said. Caleb looked at Atlas resting beside him. "Maybe he was just reminding everyone that you were never forgotten." The veteran became quiet for a moment. He looked around at the people who now stopped to talk with him, the neighbors who knew his name, and the small community that had formed around a simple friendship. He held the old photograph of his K9 companion and smiled. The memories were still there. The past was still important. But now, those memories were no longer carried alone. As the weeks and months continued, Atlas remained part of the routine. He still walked with Caleb. He still visited the veteran. He still offered the same quiet companionship that started the journey. Nothing about Atlas changed. And maybe that was the most beautiful part. The German Shepherd did not need to become something extraordinary. He was already extraordinary because he cared in the simplest way possible. He showed up. One afternoon, Caleb sat beside the veteran while Atlas rested peacefully between them. The sounds of the grocery store filled the background. People walked by. Cars passed. Life continued moving forward. But in that small moment, three lives connected by chance had become connected by something much stronger: trust, loyalty, and compassion. Caleb looked at Atlas and smiled, knowing that some stories are not about grand victories. They are about quiet choices. A dog choosing to stop. A person choosing to listen. A community choosing to see someone who had been overlooked. As the evening light faded, Atlas stood beside Caleb, ready to walk home. The retired veteran waved gently, knowing they would return. And this time, he was not waiting because he was alone. He was waiting because he knew someone cared enough to come back. Sometimes a miracle is not a moment that changes everything. Sometimes a miracle is a small heart with four paws that reminds another heart it still has a place in this world.